Welcome to Lab 12. So in this lab, we're going to be discussing comparative primate anatomy. The main things we're going to focus on is diet and dietary adaptations. So how are their body size and their teeth affected by the diet and the dietary adaptations they have. Then we're going to be focusing on locomotion and locomotor adaptation. So how does their primary form of locomotion affect their anatomy? And then the last thing we're going to be looking at is sexual dimorphism and how it's affected by social organization. So we're really focusing on those three things for this chapter. So it's not too difficult and it's not a lot, but again, a lot of this information, it just makes sense, right? We think about it, okay, small body size, we need small packets of energy. Which ones are small packets of energy? That's really how we identify or we correlate these kinds of things, and it'll make more sense as I talk about it. So primate behavior and anatomy. So let's get started. So some anatomical traits are better suited for a specific behavior than others, right? So therefore, if a population practices that same behavior for many generations, we find that the particular anatomical traits are selectively favored and they become more prevalent in the population. So biological anthropologists will identify particular anatomical adaptations that correspond to a particular primate behavior. They then use these patterns as an analogy for interpreting the fossil record. So this is helpful because we cannot directly observe these extinct species, right? We can use what we know about living primate anatomy and their behavior, and then use that to help us interpret the fossil record, right? So for example, you can hypothesize, given current primate anatomy, that a really large molar tooth meant that this primate must have had a diet that required a lot of chewing, right? Because our molar teeth in the back are our chewing teeth. And so a large molar tooth means that a lot of heavy chewing going on, right? So that's something that we can hypothesize. So when we look at diet and dietary adaptations, which is where we're going to start, we see that some foods are more difficult to digest than others. So they require special adaptations to facilitate digestion. Primates with different diets often have different tooth forms and different digestive tracts. This is useful when interpreting the fossil record because many dietary adaptations are found in the teeth. The teeth are the best preserved and most common element found in the fossil record, right? So teeth are very well preserved and they're the most common thing that we find. And so using the teeth, we can then hypothesize a diet and diets that this primate might have taken. So some foods we look at as providing small bursts of energy, while others will provide slow burning energy. And so this is where I hope you guys are familiar with like exercise and fueling your body, because this is really going to help you grasp this concept, right? So certain foods are good for rapid fuel and certain foods are good for long burning fuel. And so the way that I think about this is by thinking about the foods that we eat and how we fuel our body. And so when you say are looking for a rapid fuel, right? And the first thing that our body digests is carbohydrates, it's sugar. Sugar is a fast thing that we can just quickly, our body will quickly digest it, right? We digest sugars first, then proteins, then fats. No, it's sugars, then fats, then proteins, then amino acids, right? And you never want to be starving so much that your body starts breaking down amino acids, because then it means it's breaking down your body. But that's a whole nother conversation. And so when we think about it, we'll stick to sugars. We know that there are different types of carbohydrates, right? When you fuel your body, you know that there are different types, right? There's complex carbohydrates and then there's simple carbohydrates. And so when we are, say, going to fuel our body and we need these quick bursts of energy, right? We might eat something like bread, pasta, refined carbohydrates, right? These quick, fast burning energy. But if you need that long burning energy, something to keep you fuller for longer, you're going to go for complex carbohydrates. And I know this from trial and error. I know this from experience. So I practice Ramadan, and in Ramadan we don't eat throughout the daytime, right? We fast from sun up to sundown. And so I have learned over the years of trial and error and nutritional research, I have learned that complex carbohydrates are slow burning fuel. So in the morning when I'm eating for Ramadan, I will eat things like steel cut oatmeal, or that old fashioned oatmeal, not the quick minute oatmeal, right? Those more complex carbohydrates. I'll add in, like protein with like a hard-boiled egg or something like that. And that food versus when I eat something like just an egg or like a quick sandwich or something just because I ran out of time or I overslept, those complex carbs will keep me fuller a lot longer, and I won't feel hungry until maybe 2-3 o'clock. Whereas if I eat the simple carbs or kind of like the fast food ish that I have, I'll be hungry by 10 a.m. right? So when we understand food in this sense, we can then you can also understand this idea, that certain foods provide small bursts of energy and others will produce slow burning energy, right? And I'll make this analogy throughout this entire section because I really want to drive home that idea that it's very similar to how we fuel our body, right? I know you guys aren't familiar with my thesis or my master's work. My master's work was looking at nutrition in children, and this was one of the focuses I did was, how we fuel our body. And so, and how children fuel their body and how they learn about food. So it's very, very important to think of this whole aspect of this section, when we're thinking about these packets of energy, right? That's what we want to look at. So you're going to hear me say, gums, insects. These are small packets of energy, right? Small bursts of energy versus foliage is a large packet of energy. Just think of it as like packets of energy, essentially, right? So I'll be making those analogies throughout the entire section. So some foods provide small bursts of energy, small packets of energy. Others provide slow burning energy. So because of this, primates with these different diets will often have different body sizes depending on the energy available from their food, right? Most primates will eat a wide range of food, right? Fruits, leaves, insects, meat, etc. However, each primate will emphasize some type of food over the other. So orangutans will eat fruit, leaves, honey, insects, right? Of all of those foods, though, fruit makes up the majority of the diet. Leaves, honey, insects will serve as supplements to the fruit, right? So they really, majority of the time, eat fruit, but they'll make it up with the rest of it, right? They need protein somehow. They'll eat insects. They need, whatever it is. A primate has anatomical adaptations that suit its dietary emphasis. So, again, with orangutans have adaptations for fruit eating as opposed to leaf eating or insect eating, and we see it in their teeth, right? Among the primates, there are 4 different dietary emphases. And so we have Insectivory, we have Gummivory, we have Folivory, and then we have Frugivory, right? So I'm telling you right now, Insectivory and Gummivory are our small packets of energy. Folivory is our slow burning energy, our large packets of energy, and then Frugivory is kind of like a medium packet of energy, right? So we can correlate size to that, or primate size to that. So we'll start off with Insectivory. And so Insectivory is a diet that emphasizes insects. Very straightforward, right? These foods provide small packets of energy. And so if we had a large-bodied primate that was an insectivore, that large-bodied primate would need to eat a massive amount of insects in order to obtain enough energy to support its size. Therefore, given that thought process, insectivorous primates tend to have small bodies that can then survive more efficiently on these small packets of energy. Right? Remember, everything makes sense, right? Small packets of energy, they need to be smaller primates, right? So they can survive off of that. Insectivores will also have teeth with very pointy cusps, and these teeth help them crunch through the hard exteriors of insects. Once that insect has been broken down into smaller pieces, it's then swallowed and sent down the digestive tract, right? Going down that sense, insects are also very easy to digest. So the digestive tracts of insectivores are simple and short, right? Not like our colobus monkey that has a long digestive tract because he is a folivore, right? So many of our lorises, our tarsiers, they are insectivorous, as are some of the marmosets. The marmosets are our New World monkeys, right? So that's insectivory. Next, we have gummivory. And so gummivory is a diet that emphasizes tree gums or sap, right? In many trees, we have sap that oozes out of the bark of the stem, or the trunk. And so some non-human primates will eat that sap. Similar to insects, tree sap provides a small burst of energy. I think of it as think of it like maple syrup, right? If you drink maple syrup, right, because that's a tree sap, right? Consume maple syrup, you'll get a quick small burst of energy, right? You can't live off of maple syrup, obviously, right? So they'll offset that diet with bugs and stuff like that. So you'll often see they'll have sharp molars in order to offset with the insects. But what I'm trying to get here is that tree sap provides small bursts of energy. So gummivorous primates tend to be small bodied, right? Quick burst of energy. Again, gums don't provide necessary proteins. So many gummivores will supplement their diet with insects. Tree gums are trapped inside the tree bark, and the bark must be gnawed at to expedite the release of gums, right? So think again of maple syrup, right? In order to get maple syrup, they have to tap into the tree, right? And then when they tap into the tree, they little nozzle thingy, and then out drips the maple syrup, right? Same thing with our primates, right? Our gummivores. They need to facilitate those gums, the tree sap, to come out of the tree, right? So our gummivorous lemurs and lorises have what we call a dental comb, right? That's this right here. This dental comb. And dental combs help scrape the tree bark and encourage the seepage of the gum or the sap. So gums, and so what it is the four lower incisors, instead of going upwards, will protrude outwards. They then take that, they'll scrape it against the tree, and they'll encourage the oozing of that sap. Again, gums are easy to digest like insects, so gummivorous primates also have relatively simple and short digestive tracts. So in addition to some lemurs and lorises, many marmosets are also gummivorous as well. Next, we have our folivores or folivory. Folivory is a diet that emphasizes leaves or foliage and other plant parts. So again, you're probably noticing here, like the root word goes with the type of diet and the diet adaptation, right? We have our insectivores, they eat insects. Our gummivores eat gums. Our folivores eat foliage, so trees. So because their diet emphasizes chewing rather than biting, many folivorous primates have large molars and smaller incisors, right? What happens is before they can swallow the plants, they will have to chew and chew and chew and chew to break apart the plants, right? Their molars are large because they have to chew on these plants for so long. Their molars will also have special shearing crests, right? When folivorous primates chew, those shearing crests of their top molars will work with the shearing crests of their bottom molars. And what they do is they work together to shred the fibrous plant material. So I think of this as like if you've ever seen herb scissors, that kind of way. Better of an analogy that I think of is if you've ever seen, it's kind of one of those like novelty gifts where they have like those bear claws that you can put on, like you can hold on your wrist, and it's for like ripping apart meats. If you've ever seen that, I think it's like a novelty gift. I will admit that I did want one, did want those bear claw things for a while, but it's used to like shred meat essentially. It's the same way that these shearing crests work, right? These crests will work with these crests and they'll just kind of rip apart the vegetation, right? These primates, our folivorous primates, also tend to have large mandibles and jaw muscles to help with chewing. And so large jaw muscles sometimes require extra areas of bone for muscle attachment. So the best folivores that I think of are my favorite folivores, and they are gorillas, right? Folivorous gorillas have what we call a sagittal crest. This sagittal crest is an extra ridge of bone along the midline of the cranium, right? Where we, us humans, have a sagittal suture, they have a sagittal crest, right? And this crest allows for the attachment of the powerful jaw muscles. And so those muscles will then attach there, they'll attach to the jaw, and it allows for that extensive chewing. Even after that leafy material has been shredded in the mouth, it still requires extensive digestion to maximize the extraction of available nutrients. Because of this, our folivorous primates often have special adaptations in their digestive tracts. So many leaf-eating primates will have elongated intestines, like our colobus monkeys, and that will help digest plant material, right? It's an elongated intestine, which means the food, that bolus of food, will stay in that intestinal tract a lot longer so they can extract the maximum amount of nutrients from that bolus of food. Leaves provide limited slow burning energy, and leaf eating requires a longer digestive tract. So like our colobus monkey, right? It's an old world monkey. They have special stomachs, similar to the cow stomach, that contain bacteria to help break down the leaves. So again, these are adaptations to help them digest that plant material, right? Therefore, our folivorous primates tend to have larger bodies. The classic example of this is the gorilla. It is the largest living primate. Other folivorous primates will include your colobines, such as the langur, the black and white colobus, as well as your howler monkey, which is a New World monkey. Next, we have our frugivores. Frugivory is a diet that emphasizes fruit. Fruit is relatively easy to digest, and it provides an intermediate amount of energy, right? So insectivores, insects, gums, small packets of energy, foliage, large packets of energy, fruit, intermediate, so medium amounts of energy. Frugivorous primates tend to have medium-sized bodies and relatively simple digestive tracts. In order to properly crush fruit, frugivores will have molars with low rounded cusps that act similar to juicers, to then squeeze the fruit and help reduce it to a pulp. So I think of it as like orange juicers. They have that mound, and if you've ever gotten an orange, you just kind of like rub it on top of that, and you extract all the juice and all the pulp as much as possible. Chewing fruit is much easier than chewing leaves. So the molars of a frugivore are not as large as the molars of a folivore. At the same time, though, biting is more important to a frugivore. Just think of how we have to bite into an apple, right? So biting is more important. So if we have to bite into an apple, which teeth are going to be more important in that case? I'm hoping you said the incisors, right? And so what we see is that they'll have enlarged first incisors, right? So biting is more important to a frugivore than it is to a folivore. A folivore can fold and wad the leaves into the mouth, but a frugivore often has to take bites of fruit before it can be digested and chewed and digested. So that biting, like I said, emphasizes in wider incisors in frugivores than our folivores. So our here we have the incisors. They're usually wider on a frugivore than we see in a folivore. Most primates are frugivorous. This includes some lemurs and lorises, most of our New World monkeys, numerous of our cercopithecines, and many of the non-human apes like our gibbons and our orangutans. Okay, so that is diet and dietary adaptation. The next section that we're going to look at is locomotion and locomotor adaptations. And so this is another important part of primate behavior and anatomy, because we can see that their anatomy is reflective of the locomotion that they take part in. So locomotion is an animal's form of movement in traveling from one place to another. So each form of locomotion requires different things of the body. So some locomotor strategies might rely more on the arms or forelimbs, while other strategies might rely more on the legs or the hind limbs. And we'll see that with each of them, and you'll see the differences between the different types. We'll start first with vertical clinging and leaping. And so VCL is a form of locomotion where the body is oriented vertically and movement occurs by leaping from tree to tree. The primate will begin by clinging upright to a tree trunk, as we see here. It then will push off the tree with its legs and leap through the air. While it's leaping through the air, it will flip and then it will land on another nearby tree in an upright clinging position. In VCL, then, because the pushing off of the tree is the important part, right? That's what gets them, it propels them, right? The legs do most of the work, both leaping and absorbing some of that shock of landing. So this form of locomotion, we see it's unusual, but it's practiced only by some of our lemurs and lorises as well as our tarsiers. This adaptation we see most extreme in our tarsiers because, again, tarsal bone, right? Their ankles are so elongated that the primates have been named for that dramatic foot or those tarsal bones. Tarsiers also have an unusual tibia and fibula bones that are fused together at the distal end, and it provides more support and shock absorption, right? So VCL, right, vertical clinging and leaping, right? They'll push off on their legs, they'll flip in the air, and they'll land on another tree. All right, this here is a video where you can see VCL happening, and then they slow it down in slow motion for you to really see how they move. All right, next is suspensory. Suspensory locomotion is a form of locomotion where the body is suspended or it's hanging below the tree branches. There are two types, right? Brachiation, semi-brachiation. So brachiation is a form of suspensory locomotion where movement occurs through arm over arm swinging. So think monkey bars. This movement is dependent on the arms. So brachiators, unlike our VCL, our vertical clinging and leapers, brachiators have very long arms. They have long curved fingers which help the body hang from the tree branches, right? So we're already seeing a pattern here. Vertical clinging and leaping relies on the legs, right, the hind limbs, to push off. Therefore, the hind limbs are longer than the forelimbs. Suspensory locomotion relies on the arms, right? Arm over arm swinging. Therefore, the arms are longer than, or the forelimbs are longer than the hind limbs. And then they have long curved fingers to help the body hang from the tree branches. Our suspensory locomotion and our brachiation, they need to have mobile shoulder joints in order to have a full range of motion in their arms. So what we see is that their scapulas are positioned on the posterior surface of the rib cage rather than on the lateral surface, right? So what that means, if you've forgotten directional terminology, which I hope you haven't, is that the scapulas, instead of being on the sides, like we see in like dogs, right? It is on the back where our scapulas are, so on the posterior surface. What this does is it frees up some of their shoulder area and it allows for more mobility. So brachiators, aside from having scapulas on the posterior surface of the rib cage, longer arms, curved fingers, will also have mobile wrists that allow the hand to stay in place while holding the tree branch, while they hold the tree branch, and then allows the body to rotate in different directions. So if you ever hung from like a monkey bar, you know that your body can rotate around without having to readjust, right? Our wrists are mobile for that. So you can hold on top and your body can move in different directions. So most brachiating primates have broad chests and short lumbar areas that improve stability, and they decrease movement in the trunk while they suspend from the tree branches. Humans have many of these features still. When we relax our hands, and I want you to try this out as I say it, when you put your hand out, right, and you relax your hand, right, our fingers will curve, right? So you put your hand flat, relax, you notice your fingers curved, right? That is a brachiator trait, right? Curved fingers. We also have scapulas that are positioned on the back of our rib cage, which allow for a full 360 rotation in our arms. Right? We have these features because in our evolutionary past, our ancestors were brachiators. So we have maintained some of those adaptations. All apes have adaptations for brachiation, because the last common ancestor of all apes was probably a brachiator. Today, the only apes that regularly practice brachiation are the gibbons and the siamangs, which are our lesser apes, and true brachiation is not seen in any of the non-ape primates. What we see, though, is semi-brachiation. And so semi-brachiation is a form of suspensory locomotion where movement occurs through the use of the arms and a specially adapted prehensile tail, which can then grasp tree branches. So automatically, because I said prehensile tail, you should automatically know that this is only in our New World monkeys, right? Semi-brachiation is not true brachiation because it does not involve arm over arm swinging. They don't have the skeletal adaptations seen in true brachiation, such as that highly immobile shoulder joint, right? Semi-brachial skeletons will resemble more that of a quadrupedal primate with the addition of that prehensile tail. We see this in only in our New World monkeys, right? Howler monkeys, spider monkeys, woolly monkeys, and capuchin monkeys, right? Then we have quadrupedalism. Quadrupedalism is a form of locomotion that uses all four limbs. We have two major types, arboreal and terrestrial. Quadrupedalism is the most common form of primate locomotion. And so arboreal quadrupedalism is a form of quadrupedal locomotion that is practiced in the trees. These quadrupeds will run and walk along the horizontal surfaces of tree branches, and then they'll jump from branch to branch. Frequently, they'll use both their arms and their legs might be slightly longer to facilitate leaping between those tree branches. The hands and the feet are prehensile and have relatively long fingers and toes to help hold on to the tree branches. Usually, they'll have a long tail. This is not a prehensile tail. It's a long tail to help with balance, right? So it's not there to grasp, it's there to help balance. Our quadrupeds will also have narrow chests, and their scapulas will be positioned laterally to the rib cage, so on the sides, not on the back. Then with our terrestrial quadrupeds, this is a form of locomotion that is practiced on the ground. So arboreal in the trees, terrestrial on the ground. It's very, very straightforward. They'll use their arms and legs relatively equally, and they'll leap. And leaping is rare in our terrestrial quadrupeds. So a terrestrial quadrupede's arms and legs we see are more similar in length, right? So with our arboreal quadrupeds, because they leap a lot from tree to tree, you'll have legs that are slightly longer than their arms. In terrestrial quadrupedalism, because leaping is rare, the legs and the arms are relatively equal. They also have a shorter and more robust hands and feet, which are well suited for bearing the weight and supporting the body on the ground, right? So the weight is being bared on the feet and the hands, so therefore their bones must be a little bit more robust. Quadrupeds or terrestrial quadrupeds, they don't need long tails for balance, so they'll have much shorter tails than our arboreal quadrupeds. And the trunk is very similar to that of arboreal quadrupeds. They'll have a narrow chest and scapulas positioned laterally to the rib cage. Less common than arboreal quadrupedalism, and it's mostly found in the Cercopithecines, which are our terrestrial Old World monkeys. There is one type of quadrupedalism that is particularly rare, and this is knuckle walking. And so knuckle walking is walking on the dorsal or the back surfaces of the middle phalanges of all four fingers. Their knuckles will support the weight of their body. And so we see this only in our gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos. Chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas are unusual because they maintain the adaptations for brachiation, but they spend a lot of time on the ground. This forces the apes into a locomotor compromise, right? So again, remember, they have the adaptations for brachiation, which means their arms are longer than their legs. So this is the locomotor compromise that I'm talking about. They have to balance those ancestral brachiation traits with their current terrestrial quadrupedal behaviors. So what happens is that their arms and legs are of different length, right? They don't have arms and legs similar length, and they don't have short fingers. So their brachiator arms are much longer than their legs, so their chests are elevated high off the ground when their hands are on the ground, right? So usually I would draw this out for you. Let's see if I can draw this out. Here we go. So what happens is that in a quadruped, and excuse my drawing, it's not the best. In a quadruped, generally, here's the head, the spine will come out this way, and then the legs will come out this way, right? And you will have, sorry, let me see if I can erase this. Let me erase that one. Right, go back to pen. And sorry, because I need to make sure that I make these legs the same height, right? So arms and legs are the same height, right? That is our quadruped. With our knuckle walkers, and I will put them right here, is you have their head, and let's do their arms first, right? And then their spine is actually going to come downwards like this because their legs are shorter than their spine. And so this is our locomotor compromise, right? Their arms are longer because they retained that brachiator arms, but they are knuckle walking for a majority of the time, right? So their chest, as we can see here with this gorilla, here's our head. The spine is actually, so you can see it here perfectly, right? Here's the two limbs, and then right here you have one limb, and then you have the other one down here. So their spine is up, their chest is elevated, right? And that's that locomotor compromise that we're talking about, right? So they balance their ancestral brachiation traits with their current terrestrial quadrupedal behaviors. So because they don't have the short fingers optimal for terrestrial locomotion, they walk instead on their knuckles, right? That's another compromise, right? They have to knuckle walk. So their fingers naturally will curl towards their palms while they knuckle walk because they have the curved fingers of a brachiator. So their phalanges of their hands then are robust to support their weight, right? Specifically those knuckles, the middle phalange, they're particularly more robust to support the weight of a gorilla. Just think of a gorilla being the biggest primate, biggest ape and primate. So now let's quantify locomotor adaptations. So in addition to observing the general characteristics, primatologists may collect quantitative data to help them identify locomotor adaptation, right? This is really helpful when we're looking at fossils as well. So when we reviewed many of the forms of locomotion, we observed, and I pointed out to you guys, that they correspond to different arm and leg lengths. So, for example, our vertical clinger and leapers have long legs to aid in pushing off and landing as they leap from tree trunk to tree trunk. Primate limb proportions follow that. So primate limb proportions follow quantifiable patterns which allow anthropologists to correlate limb measurements with locomotion type. The most commonly used measurement is the intermembral index. So inter means between, and membral means limbs. So intermembral, between the limbs. So the intermembral index is a ratio of the forelimb length to the hind limb length. So this is our equation here, and I'm going to talk you through it. So to calculate the intermembral index, primatologists measure the length of the humerus and the length of the radius. The sum of those two measurements, which is here on top, humerus length, radius length, the sum of that is the overall hind limb length, right? Right, so here we have that here. Then they measure the length of the femur, right, and the length of the tibia, and the sum of that is the overall hind limb length, right? So humerus, radius, add that together, femur, tibia, add that together, right? The sum of these measurements, then the forelimb length is divided by the overall hind limb length. And then you multiply that by 100, and that generates your intermembral index. And this is what we're talking about. So an intermembral index of anywhere between 50 to 80, you have a vertical clinging and leaper. If you have an intermembral index from 80 to 100, you have a quadruped. If you have an intermembral index between 100 and 150, then you have a brachiator or a knuckle walker, right? So all it's saying is that if you have an intermembral index less than 100, then the animal has long hind limbs. If the value is greater than 100, then the animal has long forelimbs. If it's close to 100, then the forelimbs and the hind limbs are of relatively equal length, right? That's all it is. The last thing we're going to talk about is sexual organization and social organization and sexual dimorphism. So, sexual dimorphism is the physical differences between mature males and females of a species. So, sexual dimorphism will manifest overall in a larger overall body size in adult males than females, as well as larger canine teeth and more robust cranial features in adult males than the females. Humans have only slight sexual dimorphism. So males tend to be a little larger and more robust than females, and size differences are used by forensic anthropologists to help sex skeletons. Degrees of sexual dimorphism relate to degrees of male-male competition, and primates with more male-male competition will have more pronounced sexual dimorphism. So primates with less male-male competition will have less sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism is the result of an increase and exaggeration of male size, right? So it's not that the female body types are a smaller version of the male types. Instead, it's the male body types are enlarged versions of the female types. So just keep that in mind. These enlarged traits are selectively favored for because they improve reproductive success. And so bigger, more robust males out-reproduce the smaller, more gracile male competitors. So their enlarged size and features may help them to win direct competitions with smaller males, so they're able to maintain access to females for reproduction. So a male with enlarged traits may be able to maintain access to females by simply threatening males at a distance and avoiding direct competition entirely. The exaggerated traits of robust males are passed on preferentially to the next generation, and over time we end up with populations with extreme differences in male and female body types. So because sexual dimorphism relates to male-male competition, it then also relates to social organization. So some types of primate social organization have more intense male-male competition than others. Therefore, in some types of social groups, we're likely to see more pronounced sexual dimorphism than others. In our monogamous social groups, male-male competition is limited, so we don't really see it. So most adult males will be partnered with an adult female, and then they'll be successfully reproducing. The males don't need to compete for mating partners, so we see the least amount of sexual dimorphism in these monogamous groups. In our single male polygamous groups and in some of our solitary groups, male-male competition is extremely high. So one adult male will have access to a group of females. This then leaves many of our adult males wandering around without sexual partners. These unpartnered males will regularly challenge a male with females and then attempt to take over his group or territory. So lastly, there is little to limit the intensity of competition. So the males competing with one another live separately. They don't need to maintain a social relationship. So just think of it this way. If you're competing for a female and you're not even part of the group, right? You go out, you say you're in a new city or you're traveling, right? And you go out to a bar and it's pre-COVID and you're a male and you're competing for a female, right? You have no ties to this community. So the fact that you have no ties to this community means that there is very little that can limit the intensity of your competition. So you can get in an all-out fist fight and, if you get away without getting, the cops called on you or whatever, then there is no social ramification for it. So there is no need to maintain a social relationship if you lose, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Competition in these circumstances, when there is little to limit the intensity of competition or violence in these circumstances, when there is very little to limit the intensity of the competition in our primates, can get particularly violent. So consequently, if you think about it, sexual dimorphism is extremely pronounced in our single male groups. Finally, if you look at multi-male polygynous groups, male-male competition is relatively high. But an adult male will have access to multiple females within his group, but access to mates will be hindered by his position, right, in that social hierarchy. So our higher status males will have access to better or more mating partners of the right age and fertility. Therefore, competition exists between males trying to improve their social status and their consequent access to females. In contrast, our single male polygynous groups, there is, however, a limit to the competitions within these multi-male groups, because again, in these multi-male groups, they live in this group. So now, same scenario, you're out, you're looking for a female because you're a male, but you go to your local bar and you live in a small community. And so you live in this small community and you go to your local bar and you're competing for females, right? But again, you live in this community. So you say if you are going to compete, you are not going to get to the levels of a full-on fist fight, right? Likely you're not going to, because you still have to live in this community after that competition, right? So you are going to face the social ramifications of that, right? Same thing with primates, right? They live in these communities, these groups. So they have to be sure that the competition doesn't get too violent, right? So this then acts as a limit to the competition within the multi-male group. These males do often continue to live together and maintain social relationships, so that prevents them from the competition from becoming particularly violent. As a result, sexual dimorphism in multi-male polygynous groups is pronounced, but not as extreme as in your single male groups. Therefore, when we understand the relationship between sexual dimorphism and social organization, we can then use the degree of sexual dimorphism present in a population to hypothesize about and infer the likely social organization of the group. Right? And the last thing I want you to look at is this graph, right? It's looking at the sexual dimorphism compared with body size dimorphism and relative canine size between our monogamous single male and multi-male groups. And what we see is that there is a high amount among our single male in both of body size and sexual dimorphism, and relative canine size. High amount also in relative canine size in our multi-male, also in our multi-male for body size dimorphism, and low in our monogamous groups. And so again, when we understand social organization and how it affects sexual dimorphism, it makes sense how the two work and correlate to each other. All right, so that's the end of this lab. So that's the end of this lab. I'll see you in the next lab.